everyone. My name is Richie Karsha. I am a member of the Associates Program at the Center for Public Choice and Market Process. And please join me in welcoming our speaker, Patrick Reasonover. Patrick is a writer and producer at Just Add Water. He has produced 2 feature-length documentaries, including the one we watched the first part tonight, as well as is in production on a third on civil asset forfeiture. In 3 weeks, he will be in Serbia producing a short documentary, and in 2 months, he will be producing a narrative short film in Nepal. He co-created and directed the animated comedy web series PIG-TV, based on the New York Times best-selling Politically Incorrect Guides, and starring Michael Malice and Tom Woods. He's currently at work on a comedy audio novel entitled Rednecks versus Aliens. Please join me in welcoming our guest, Patrick Reasonover.
Thank you.
So we're going to open this up to Q&A, the people here. If you're online, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. We've got someone monitoring, and we'll read those and address those as well. I'm going to kick us off by just starting a quick question and looking at the film and asking you sort of 2 things. One is, what motivated you to take on this topic, and what did you have to do to prepare and to sort of pick the research and the topic and the area?
Well, we've always been at the company very interested in innovation. I mean, you know, we're in the film business. You're in the business of making things look cool. And so there's in the innovation business, there's people interested in making things that are cool that actually work and do something. And so also we are very interested in these big global problems like global warming and, you know, animal welfare. And so for us, the idea of looking at how regulation and innovation work together when it comes to attempting to solve these big global problems was it was just kind of right in our wheelhouse. So it was something that we were very interested in doing. We responded to an RFP and got an initial grant to help us get going. And then when it comes to the research phase of it, we had to figure out, how do you make a film about these 2 big ideas and how they work together, which is kind of a challenge, because ideally in a film what you want are characters and a conflict and exciting setting and cinematography. So it was a challenge, but I feel like you know, our direction in picking these emerging technologies enabled us to find these pretty amazing people and profile what they're doing.
So I'm going to open it up. If anyone has a question, we typically defer to our market process scholars first to be able to ask questions before we move that to anyone else in the audience.
So we just heard a bit about kind of how big businesses actually, contrary to popular belief, really do like regulations because they keep barriers to entry up. What do you see as kind of the best first step to solving this problem? Is lobbying the issue, or do we kind of need that intergovernmental agency that they talked about to help regulatory agencies work together? What do you kind of see as a really efficient first step to solving that problem?
Well, I think so. We didn't really hear a great solution to this problem when we were interviewing folks, but you know, I think there's some things that are going on right now that make sense, right? So when it comes to the drones, well, how are we going to regulate drones? Well, it's the FAA. Well, what is the FAA going to do? Well, who's going to be using these drones? Google, Amazon. Well, shouldn't we bring these people in who are developing the technology and have them help us figure out how this is going to work? Sounds perfectly reasonable. Of course, except Google and Amazon are now going to come up with plans that privilege only them in the entire drone market. And so this is a challenge for the regulators. And in some ways, we didn't focus on this, but one of the stories we didn't cover that I really liked was this idea of these economic zones. So you have these zones where they're just experimenting with different drone type technologies in just this area. and then maybe, through kind of federalism principle in other areas, it's being done in different ways as these things are kind of being experimented on. And there's kind of largely like not a lot of regulations happening at all, very basic in these areas. Then we sort of see how it performs, and you sort of base your broadband, regulation on something like that. I don't really know another way to get around that problem, but I'm a filmmaker, so I just talk to people and they tell me what they think. So maybe Peter would be the one to answer.
I'll just comment that, it's a very common thing. It's what Patrick just referred to as what we refer to as regulatory capture, right? So who knows most about that issue, right? The people in that business, and what do they want, right? They're going to want things that are going to protect their incumbency, right? So it's a very hard problem to get over.
Hi. I was just going to ask you more of a question about the creative process, since you said like filmmaker, that's your role. As producer, what was kind of your favorite way that you got to get involved, or your favorite aspect of the project overall?
So a producer is kind of an amorphous title that kind of means almost like anything, and especially also nothing, as you will see people credited for being producers. So my role in the film was, helping develop the creative and the approach and what our narratives are going to be. I called and found all these guys. I interviewed them to help writing and cracking the story and how we're going to put it together, hiring the team who's going to go and execute the thing, including buying flights and Airbnbs and crafty for them to eat, and then kind of managing the edit process where we bring on our post-production team. You guys saw that stop motion that we did. That was a crazy thing. I do not recommend that you do that ever again. But so I partner on this. We have Andrea Fuller, Michael Ozias. He was the director of the film, and so he's sort of responsible for the creative and the visual look. And we worked together on the storyline and collaborated. And so for us, it's I don't know. I feel like in some ways it's like it's not like having a baby, which I feel like I can't even say, but that's the thing that's popped in my mind, because I feel like we're like putting together something out of clay or raw materials, but it's sort of already there. Like the story or whatever we're trying to do is already there, and so from a creative standpoint, we're trying to chip away at the non-essentials and get to the core. And so that's really kind of what I'm focused on as a producer. How do we get to the creative core on time, on budget, without anybody suing us or getting fired?
Thank you.
One thing I'm curious about, what was, in all your researching and trying to do this, what was maybe the technological innovation that you came across, or perhaps even the regulation of that technological innovation that maybe surprised you the most? Like, what was the thing that you were just like, I can't believe that either exists, or I can't believe that they want to regulate it, or they can't figure out how to regulate it in this way?
The most frustrating thing is definitely the meat, without question. Because this is chemically meat. So it's not a drug. There's nothing really needs to be done about it. It's meat. And you see that lab, and you maybe say, oh, well, we need to regulate the lab. But when you have that lab that you see with the robot arm, and it's in a vacuum, and they don't even need to use antibiotics, because they control all circumstances that goes into the production of this meat, sets beside one of these farms, and you just think about the pollution and the unsanitary and all of the things that are going on. It's sort of like, well, the idea that you need to regulate these people, but these people are fine, is sort of, on the face of it, ridiculous. And then the other thing that to me really stuck is when you sort of just start thinking about the application of these technologies and the idea that we could end animal farming around the entire world and have cheaper, better, higher quality meat. All of the people, unlike these cattlemen, who I feel like are thinking very narrowly, you think about all the people who are involved in this industry who could be doing something else with their lives rather than this. Maybe they want to be poets or artists or painters or accountants, or I don't know, have any idea. But whatever they want to be, they don't have to do this for money because it's been solved. And that's it's an incredible thing. It's sad. Just to update, we didn't get this approved in the United States, but Singapore approved it, and so Josh moved the company to Singapore, where they are now, operating and actually producing the meat for sale.
Hi, I'm Nicholas. Just before my question, I wanted to applaud your inclusion, actually, of the animal agriculture industry. Before I was vegan 8 years ago, I was pretty much just like those cattlemen in cowboy hats, very scared of change. And after learning everything about regulation, including ag-gag laws, that, keep powerhouses, for example, like, it's very scary. So my question is actually, did you look at other countries where you see a lot of innovation, like in Eastern Asia, Western Europe, to see what their regulations are like, to compare?
Yeah, well, we did, and what you find is America is a great exporter of many things, including our regulatory system. And so often, through trade agreements, these countries are just replicating our same system when we're dealing with them. So it's sort of like unusual when you have a situation where Singapore just said, come, you can produce and sell this meat. They certainly did. But I guess also to speak to that is tomorrow night we're going to see the scientists who created this plastic resin that sucks carbon out of the air at 1,000 times the rate of a tree simply by drying. It doesn't have any other power. It's like it's wet, and the way the chemical bonds are set up, it just that the carbon attaches to it, goes in the water, off gases. So that's how it's able to do it. So that company, because there's no carbon tax in the United States or other means of having property rights associated with this, that technology was licensed by a company in Ireland. Just Food is in Singapore. And also tomorrow night we're going to see the aquaculture, which is now is a factory in Mexico and has moved out of U.S. shores because they can't get permitting. I think the only one that's not active in another country, not the USA, is the 3D printed organs so far, but kind of sad. So in some ways we're exporting this bad regulatory or overwrought regulatory system, but there are exceptions where these guys are able to do stuff, which is great.
There's stories in your preparation that, that you didn't include that you thought you would have liked to. Were there some of the topics maybe that didn't make it into the film that were sort of interesting industries or things that you looked at?
Yes. So the number one we wanted to do, but we couldn't, and it was really a question of time. Though it sort of fell on the cusp, but all of the stories that you see that we feature specifically are what is a major global problem that currently trillions of dollars or whatever is being spent to solve through some regulatory, and we have conference and academic studies. But literally, if we just used like Klaus's resin technology we see tomorrow, we could solve global warming by sucking the carbon out of the air. Amazing. Plus, God knows what this Just Foods type cultured meat technology would do when you eliminate all of this waste that's happening from farms, et cetera. That in of itself probably does like is a huge factor in decreasing that. So, man, I got lost there. What was your question? Oh, what didn't we include? Okay, right. So that's where we go. So that's all great. That's all huge. Ocean acidification, saving these people. This one didn't have that, but we thought it was awesome. Passenger drones. So it's like Uber, except it's a drone that you ride in. And so we had, there's 3 companies actually that have this. Boeing's one of them, but theirs wasn't even really prototype. There's a company in Germany that had this drone that you get in. It had 8 propellers, so I think if 4 of them failed, it would still fly. They put a pilot in it, but you don't need a pilot. They only have a pilot in there because people would feel uncomfortable getting in a robot drone without a pilot there, I guess. He doesn't actually do anything. And the whole system is guided by Uber, like GPS, and you would go to a building like this one, you go up to the roof, and then the Uber would land there. There would be people in line, they get in, and then it takes you off, and then it lands. So I thought that was pretty incredible, and I definitely wanted to ride in it. but didn't happen.
Nathaniel.
Hi. First, despite my appearance and my personal family history with small-scale cattle farming, I am not opposed to cultured meat. That said, we often think about regulation and innovation sort of as a competing force, or at least the entities behind those two things as competing forces. I want to propose a question thinking about instances in where government is the innovator, such as the military-industrial complex. Do you think that there is some role for regulation in that industry and in that space of innovation?
Okay, so I caveat just again being like I did research and I talked to people, but I'm not a policy scholar. So I mean, in terms of like, are you talking like microwaves and NASA?
I'm thinking more recently Boston Dynamics, Raytheon, the various weapons contractors.
Murdering robot dog?
Yeah, Robot Dog, which Boston Dynamics was against when an artist group put a gun on it, but you can still put a gun on a robot dog if you want to.
I think that, so it makes sense to talk about regulation as a one thing at a broad conceptual level, where you're just saying regulation and thinking about it in the abstract. But we had this problem, right? So it's like, well, what's regulation? Is regulation just command and control? Is it just when the agency says these are the rules, you got to follow them, or we're going to put you in jail, or take your land or money, or we're going to fine you? Or is property rights a form of regulation where we can say, well, we're just going to assign a property right to carbon. If it comes out of the ground, you have a permit to take it out of the ground, but that requires you to put it back. You can sell the permit. There can be a market, whatever. But we are going to have some form of rules around these transactions. Well, okay, so that's conceptual. But then you start getting very specific. So it makes sense that the Food and Drug regulations in some ways are not exactly like the regulations of the murdering robot dog, because that's going to be like a different area that would require the specialists. So they should still be using these general principles of property rights and the law, not just coming up with put a catalytic converter on it kind of things. But otherwise, I don't know. I think like each area kind of has its specific details as to how it's rolled out. What do you think?
It's a very interesting thing because it's very unclear sometimes when you have, because what you're talking about is situations in which you have private companies contracting to the military, so they're the ones that come under sort of the regulatory things, but the government is the contractor, right? So it's unclear as to sometimes how regulations are going to proceed, especially with innovation, right? One of the things we talked about, and maybe we can talk about this, is that when you get innovation, and you see this with the cultured meat, right? Whose job is it? When it's unclear as to what box, and even with the organs, right? When it's unclear sort of what box this fits in, people get stymied, right? We don't know you get paralyzed as to what to do, right? When there's no rules about it, the assumption is, especially with the rule makers, is, well, then we can't do it, right? Because we don't know what the rules are. And so it's interesting to think about the fact that do the rules have to exist other than in this sort of broad way of understanding property rights, contracts, right, enforcement, and so forth, and fraud, than to say, oh, well, we need to know exactly what agency this would fall under to be able to regulate it, right? Susan Dudley mentioned in this, right, the idea that innovation and so forth just moves faster and this becomes a stagnant thing, right? We don't get to, and others did as well, we don't get to turn on a dime. So it's I'll be honest, I don't know how the government handles those types of innovations, right? But I'm willing to bet, though, that they face a lot less regulatory tape, right, when they're innovating for them than maybe for the private sector alone, right? The eyes are on that and they need to figure that out.
Satisfactory answer for me. Thank you very much.
Quick technical question. Is this mic being fed into the online, or could I just not use it? It is being fed into the online. Okay, great. Okay. All right.
Other questions?
I don't know what your like career path has been, but what made you choose documentary making versus like Hollywood?
Well, I haven't just done documentary. I've made probably 50 narrative shorts, Western, sci-fi, period in Mandarin, Russian, and then I've done 2 feature docs, and then I have a third, and then I've also done animated. So to me, I like to look at it as the material tells you what it should be. This is a documentary. I mean, we maybe could have somehow written a narrative of Josh doing the Just Foods. I'm not entirely sure what that would look like, but you know, this just was a documentary, so we had to make it as a documentary, and it needs to tell us what it needs to be, you know, in a certain way. And so I chose in my career to try to learn and do a bunch of different styles and genres, so that when you find something that you feel like is really important to you, that you want to do, you can make it be what it should be.
One last thing, for me, or one last question to think about is, for me, is you had mentioned earlier that you've done a documentary called Tank Man on what happened in Beijing, right, in Tiananmen Square. You did the politically incorrect guides, right, as an animated series. You've now done this on entrepreneurship and regulation. I'm sensing a theme, so to speak, right, within your filmmaking process. What pushed you in that direction of thinking about these ideas, and, right, because they seem to be consistent with what our center does, right, of promoting sort of thinking about freedom, about liberty, about property rights, about, you know, economic conditions. Where does that come from? Where did that sort of motivate you to say, okay, I'm a filmmaker, but these are the way I'd like to think about these ideas?
Yeah, material. So I kind of feel like as a filmmaker or a storyteller of any kind, an artist, you have to consume a lot of great work, and then it goes into your memory, and then it's going to come out of your imagination, and you need to trust yourself, and you need to trust your ability to create the whole. And you really shouldn't be attempting to insert the values and the themes. They need to sort of come out organically, and you have to trust that. So early on in high school, I read Ayn Rand, who doesn't do that. But anyway, I really liked her, and it was like a window into these ideas. And then when I went to university, I majored in philosophy and creative writing, and I became more kind of focused on this idea of wisdom. Wisdom was fascinating to me, and so there's something about the merging of philosophy and rationalistic thought and the lived experience that you express through creative that I have always been trying to put together. So when it comes to the ideas of liberty, choice, markets, economics, capitalism, these are all things we think about often as other, or it's an idea, but in fact it's something we do every day. We are capitalistic beings living in a capitalistic society, and there's so many unconscious, subconscious habits that we don't even think about, that just are who we are. And so if you really want to make something true about the human condition and being an American or in our society, these themes are within you. And so for me, I feel like more artists and more filmmakers should be focused on these things. And, you know, because there's plenty of space for people to make films about devastation and all the problems in the world. But from the film, I feel like you can see there's many people out there, millions who you don't know, who are working to make it better. And their stories are just not told, and that's kind of an unfortunate thing. So these are all the ideas, and then the trying to express them in a form, the narrative that can go alongside the analytical and research work that you guys do here.
What would you say the goal in like the audience of this documentary is? Because I feel like a lot of the narrative has been the fact that the bureaucracy of government regulation is very harmful in a lot of instances. but I'm not sure that someone in like the FDA is going to watch this and be like, oh, you're right, like we should completely change the way in which our systems work. So I was just wondering, like, why make it? I mean, I found it interesting, but like there's not much I can do about it at this moment.
Well, in part two, we actually call for more regulation. So anyway, no, we made the film, I think, so as a, it's tough when you're dealing with a film that has a lot of policy stuff in it. And then we have multiple audiences. So for us, the emotional core of the film is about optimism and pessimism. They say it can't be done, our title. Well, they is not the regulators, it's all of us. You know, we elect the congressmen who then enact the law that then establishes the agency or reforms it in some way, and then those guys turn around and write rules or hold their forums, and then the rules come out. A lot of the regulators that we talked to in making the film did not turn out to be Mr. Evil Bad Guy. They seemed to more be turned into complicated hands tied person who, oh, well, maybe we would like to do this in a different way, but this is what the statute says that gave us the power, and this is what we have to do. And then also that point you were making about the risk calculation, where they're afraid of something bad's going to happen, which makes absolute sense because that is what they've been hired to do. They've been hired to be the lived precautionary principle. So the idea that you would ask them, oh, well, hey, you know, we're going to do this and there's no rules, of course they're going to say, well, we need to wait a second, we need to study it, and we need to do rules because that's what their job is, you know. And but the problem is we can't. We've gone too far in that direction when guys who have technologies that could eliminate gigantic problems just can't do what they can't do that. Now we've gone too far. So for us, we made the film to show people that there are amazing people out there doing amazing things, and the world is not going to hell. In fact, it's getting better, and if we just were more open to these ideas and letting people experiment, it would get better a lot faster.
This question is quite similar, but there seems to be a pretty strong relationship between public perception of the health, safety, and transparency of these new technologies and the regulatory limitations on those technologies. A good example being the jungle by Upton Sinclair. But with the release of the documentary, have you seen any positive change that would move us towards adopting the new innovations?
Well, the documentary was officially released, I think, in February of 2020. So the result we saw was there was a massive viral pandemic. Just kidding. So so our goals with the film was not that suddenly the people at the FDA would watch it and just have a conversion moment change and alter everything that they're doing. In some ways, we wanted people to, because a lot of this regulatory approach is ongoing, and we frame it. I don't know if you think this is a fair characterization, but when we're looking at our current regulatory system, it looks as though it's designed for an older era of industrial capitalism, where there are factories and you send people to the factories, and then, but what if there's kind of aren't any factories, and what if this is all digital? And the technological change is taking place so fast that by the time you've actually had a chance to analyze something, it's moved on, to the next thing. Well, then our regulatory system is an old industrial capitalism model, and so naturally it needs to change into a more friendly digital economy model, and so that is not something we expect to just happen like, oh, well, this guy committed the crime, but he's not in jail, and this guy is, so we're going to make the film, and then this guy's going to get off, and the real killer is going to be found. It's something where we want the audience to walk away and feel, hey, maybe I shouldn't be not in my backyard all the time, and I should start thinking, maybe we should allow for more experimentation and more innovators, and I shouldn't demand that Congress do something when something bad has happened, because maybe there's already another solution that's ongoing that I'm not aware of, just in the decentralized free market.
Emily. Yeah, could make you.
You guys have a lot of great questions.
I was gonna say, is there any other ways beyond, like obviously what you did with this documentary, that you think we could spread this information of, look at all these cool people doing cool things, that would kind of help people realize we don't need Congress all the time?
Well, I think that the best answer I have to that question is you should just be whoever you are. So if you're, when I talk to law students, you know, I can't take credit for this because the dean of the law school came up with it, Duquesne. But it's like, why don't you people who are considering a career in this think about maybe you could do something to help the people at Just Foods in your career? What would that be? You know, or you know, marketing, whatever you're doing that could, you know, help ID these situations and solve it. So I think there's some ways that you can just incorporate, you know, a kind of truth into your life and your career and what you're doing. In terms of our movie, we are currently in the phase of in film. When you're releasing a movie, they call it windows. So we're in the rent-buy window, and we're about to go into the subscription VOD window, which means it would be on a Netflix or a Peacock or a, you know, something like that next, where if I have a subscription, I can see it. So we're in the process of moving into that. And yeah, but I don't know if anyone thinks that anyone would like to see the film or you know, have it cut up or hold events. You know, we're actively trying to promote it and get these stories out there. If you're interested in talking to any of the people featured or promoting them for media opportunity, we're also doing a lot of that.
So I wanted to ask about the Singabore example. Specifically, you mentioned at the beginning of the Q&A that Just Foods moved there and they're producing. Do you think that potentially could have any sort of effect in regards to shifting in regulation regimes in the U.S. and throughout other parts of the world?
I mean, not immediately. I don't know. I mean, we did a crowdcast where we screened this movie, and we had Sonny Perdue, Secretary of Agriculture, on the crowdcast with Josh. And, you know, so he obviously is familiar with this, but didn't really seem to light a fire to make anything happen. And so I don't know. I mean, I don't really know how much pressure you would feel if you're operating on the precautionary principle. Maybe you're like, great, test it on the Singaporeans. So I think that could be the attitude. I don't know how heartbroken they are about it. But I will, one quick question I wonder. So in terms of this, what are the rules? Is it safe? So if Just Foods came in here and had the chicken nuggets that they made in the lab, how many of you would eat it? Yeah. Yeah. So we ate it. I ate it. Of course I ate it.
That was going to be my next question.
Of course,
right?
will we see them cooking the food when they have the omelet and the stuff? Yeah. You think we're going to leave and not eat it? Like, we were like upset that we maybe weren't going to get to eat it because they're like, well, I don't know the lawyers and the FDA, and maybe I don't know if we can let you guys eat it. And then also it's incredibly expensive, right? Because this model is, well, once you have one cell growing, it's two cells. But once you get a vast amount of cells in these big bioreactors, that is where the cost decline happens. You know, because it's like we already have a lot of replicating cells, but in the early stages, it's more expensive because they don't have as many cells. So we're sitting there probably eating $50 worth of the $50 chicken nugget, you know. But it was great. It was perfect, delicious. You can't tell the difference.
Didn't taste more chickeny.
He said that. I didn't really. I think that makes sense what he says because they're controlling all the inputs. But to me, when I ate it, it just tastes exactly like a chicken nugget, and the texture and everything. Yeah.
I think we've got time for maybe one more question. Anyone?
I'm very curious. I'm assuming you've probably seen some of John Stossel's specials, and you know, I've shown those to my students. There's two things I noticed is so very different about the way you approach that than John Stossel, and I'm kind of very curious to that. If that was John Stossel video, the two things would have been different is he would have had the people showing their frustration. Like, I'm trying to do this, but I can't. Look at all the... You really didn't seem to portray the actual person making the organs or whatever as being frustrated and air them with their frustrations at the agencies. And I thought that was a very interesting choice. And I know that they probably sit there and said, I'm so that was an interesting choice to me, and I'm curious about that. And the other was, he probably would have done the Singapore thing, although maybe that was after your film, and say, look what happens when we free them from regulation, right, and take you somewhere where it's flourishing. And I'm just kind of curious, you've made some very conscious choices there in how you presented those, and I just would love to hear a little bit more about those choices.
Well, also I don't have a incredibly gigantic mustache. That's another differentiator. So in terms of the choice, so it's sort of half choice, half not choice, to be frank. Like, I don't think these guys would have appeared on John Stossel, you know, because they would have known that this is about the fleecing of America, and they wouldn't have been portrayed in a way that they felt was empathetic, which is, I mean, it would have been empathetic to them, but they would have come off as a bunch of assholes who are complaining. And so on the one hand, because we're focused on its innovation, and you know, our comp was that like cooking show on Netflix. I don't know what left me. You guys know that Chef's Table. We were like, we want these innovations to look like that delicious food does, which is like art, you know. And we want you to meet the artist, and we want you to feel what we felt which was kind of like the incredible energy of being in these places. You walk into Just Foods and everybody is there, like they are on a mission to do something amazing, and every day they are doing it, and it is just like you just feel that, you know, when you're there. It's incredible. And so we wanted to give you that. And so if we had Joss or others sort of complaining or being frustrated, in some ways it takes a little bit of that amazing out of what they're doing. And we didn't want the sell to be, oh, well, he's going to go to Singapore. Fear, you know, we wanted it to be more something where we want you to identify with him and to emote and to be wowed and have wonder. And so, and then the second reason that we don't have that is because they won't do it. These guys, I'm not going to speak for them, but I'll speak for them not speaking. They know very well that if they come out and say the FDA is doing a terrible job and heads need to roll, that when they go and need more permissions, they're not going to get it. And when they say, oh, well, we're going to go to Singapore, and the FDA and the USDA, this and that, they're a bunch of incompetent morons, well, suddenly everything's going to just slow down. And maybe some competitors will get some attention, and that's a real thing, and they all said it, and we know that that's true. So they're going to be politic and not really. I think even if we'd asked the questions, they would not have gone hard to the paint on these regulatory agencies because they know it's a bad idea. Did I hit them both? Was there another one? Okay, all right.
was the international part, the Singapore.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So two things. I think Russ just gave you the next aspect, right? A follow-up of this documentary they can release on Netflix, right? Of following them in their international journeys in the UK and Singapore, right? And finding out how much they're progressing, still with optimism. But, you know, the other thing that you had mentioned is that I think you said that when you were interviewing the doctor, it was
Dr.
Atala, that there was someone in the corner, right? An attorney or something that was sort of saying, keeping them on guard as to what they should say or couldn't say because they were worried about, you know, what's going to happen in terms of if the FDA sees this, right? Didn't you mention, I think that...
Yeah, so whenever we're doing these interviews, and I don't want to single those guys out, you know, you're dealing with legal and you're dealing with marketing, and these guys are risk averse. I mean, in many ways, like regulators, their job is to say no. And so, yeah, so one of the things I wanted to, I'm glad you reminded me of is, so Dr. Atala said on a panel like this that he has to spend between 70 and 80% of his time fundraising, not working on the lab. What is he raising money for? These tests that they have to do. And they have to, and then he relayed one story where basically there was a protein that they were using. It wasn't really mission critical to what they were doing. It, was just sort of like not important. But the FDA, needed, that they didn't want to have this protein in there, or there was some problem and they needed to change it. But they had already spent like tens of millions of dollars doing this test, and he had raised that money. So now he basically had to go back and raise all the money again so they could do the exact same thing over again. So you really kind of got the impression that this guy who's sort of a genius and has this expansive idea is kind of like completely having to misapply his labor and time in this area that's just spinning the wheels. Like, so what would it look like if he had that time back? What would he be doing with it otherwise? How quickly would the technology improve or not? Yeah, I think it's all baked into that. The other thing I think that like often I've been asked about with the regulation is often people, when you think about regulation as purely a thing that's out there, oh, well, it's rules. You somewhat miss the presence of regulation for these guys. Like, what is regulation? Fear, chaos, unknown. I have brought all these people to come here to work with me for this vision of the good that I want to create. And yes, we want to make money, but most of the guys are interested in doing something awesome, which they are. So I have asked all these people to come here. I have gone and raised money, millions of dollars, to try to make this thing happen. But there's this whole area that I don't know about that seems to constantly be changing, that's filled with uncertainty, that at any moment could kill the entire operation. So I think it's not really good to have something like that.
Point, we're going to call it an evening. I want to thank everyone who came out live as well as joined us online. Tomorrow night, we are going to screen the second half of the documentary, right? So we're going to see the aquaculture and the carbon capture, right? So come out again, right? Tune in again online because it'll give us the opportunity. I wanted to do this over 2 nights so that we could see the entirety of the movie, right? As opposed to just seeing bits and pieces of it, even though more stop action animation is in our future, right? And all of that. But thank you all for coming out tonight. I'm going to, can I put that link back up, B, for the survey? So that this is for us to be able to get feedback on our events. Again, for the students, it's a way of being able to indicate attendance for your faculty members. If they've been inspired to give you extra credit to come out tonight or to tune in online. And I want to thank Patrick, and we'll get an opportunity again to do this tomorrow night, and I'm looking forward to all of you coming out again. So thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
Hey, I'm Alec Patsy. I have the pleasure of introducing Mr. Reasonover here tonight. I want to thank the people that in attendance in person and then on Zoom as well. A little brief intro for Mr. Reasonover. He's the lead producer on They Say It Can't Be Done, the fantastic film we just watched. He's previously produced the award-winning feature-length film of Dogs and Men. He's co-creator and producer on an animated comedy web series based on New York Times bestselling book series, The Politically Incorrect Guides. Through his work with corporate partners, Patrick has produced more than 300 animated, documentary, virtual reality, and narrative projects. He holds a BA from Emory University in creative writing and philosophy. So give him a warm round of applause.
Thank you, Alec. I want to start off by pointing out, first of all, that yes, philosophy majors can be employable, right? We were talking about this today, and I want to start with something that may be a little bit different and just directly on the film. And we were discussing this earlier today, is that creative writing philosophy, right, to being a filmmaker, not quite a linear A to B, right, kind of thing. And maybe just take a second to talk about how you got into film and then how you got into producing films such as this one.
Sure. I majored in philosophy and creative writing because I'd always written fiction. And I read Ayn Rand, and that got me interested in philosophy. And then I went to school, and I don't know why in a sense, I feel like philosophy is a means of ordering chaos. And so is writing stories. And so for me, when I left school, I wanted to be a novelist of the William Faulkner variety. When you're a novelist, you have to have some other way of making money to eat than writing the novel. And so I worked at an organization called the Institute for Humane Studies, which is a center not unlike this one in some ways, other than it focuses on talent development. And I was put in charge of their film and fiction programs because I was the only creative one of these people. And I didn't know anything about film, but I learned about film. And I saw that while I liked working at the organization and what it did, film was another form of storytelling that I could do. And so I just left. Didn't really put too much thought into it. Just moved to Los Angeles, started working, and then we would take projects and just learn constantly. One thing after another, always trying something new, being ready to fail. And we failed many times, many things. But it was really, I think, a key piece of the puzzle was almost like what Julie was saying there at the end. You want to kind of put yourself out into an ambiguous future so that you can see what's there. Because when you're creating something, you need to have the content in your memory for it to ever come out in the form of imagination. So for me, being a filmmaker, and it's kind of like being an entrepreneur, basically. You have a company, you have to get projects, you have to raise money. You then generate projects later, go get investment, figure out how you're going to have a return on that investment. Your product needs to be consumable. So you have to learn and think about the audience, not just yourself and your perfect vision of the beautiful good that you want to do, but something that other people want. And so for me, philosophy was actually very helpful, because when you're making a film, there's a lot of complicated things that have to happen. They all have to happen in a certain order, otherwise you blow a lot of money. And once you're out of money, you're done. And also your investors don't appreciate it when you blow the money. So part of philosophy helped me to figure out how to logically order all the steps. And then when you're on set and people are asking you multiple things, like we were on those boats, right? And there were 2 boats, and we had to jump from one boat to the next boat. So there's a lot of complicated stuff happening. So you really have to ISO out and be able to tell people what to do and what order. The most important aspect of it was asking questions. So you think you know how to ask questions initially as a human being, but actually you can get really good at asking questions, because your native blind spots or subconscious presumptions that you walk in with will prevent you from asking the right question and getting the answer. And so really the key to being a documentary filmmaker is all about asking the right question. And so we actually frame what we do. This isn't sort of like an argument. So if you watch the film, it's not an argument. What it is we begin with a question, and then ideally we want to proceed through a set of answers that lead to other questions, and then end with a deeper question that we never could have come to unless we had gone on that journey. And so that's our kind of model for doing documentary film and even narrative film.
One of the things that came off is the sea captain was noting that he doesn't get to spend much time out on the water, right? And you told a story last night about the doctor who works on the 3D organs, and he's now spending a lot of his time on development as opposed to being in the lab. And so what sense did you get from talking to these people that they're spending, how much of their time are they spending, you think, on compliance of either trying to get the regulation in place, trying to create the regulation, trying to abide by the regulation, right? Versus being able to actually work on their projects?
Yeah, I think it varies, but when it comes to these CEOs who are sort of leading the charge, in the case of, Scotty, the younger guy of the Ocean Bros, that's what we call them, those three guys. And then and in the case of Phil, they're spending huge, like most of their time dealing with compliance and permitting and figuring out where they can do this at all. They said 100 acres. There's really no reason Phil and them couldn't have done 3,000 acres out there with not much of a heavy lift in terms of operations. But it was purely permitting to expand. And then unfortunately, what happened is the regulatory costs associated with the testing and just running the whole facility tanked the business. They just couldn't produce enough to overcome those regulatory costs. And so it went into Chapter 11 bankruptcy and was bought. The algae guys, which I alluded to last night, they basically just sort of left the US. They're now licensing offshore waters in Scotland and Argentina and Chile, and I think also in Vietnam. And they've built a factory to process the kelp into an agricultural product that will, almost like an agricultural fertilizer, an alternative to chemical fertilizers that they're just making in Mexico. So regulation killed this business. I mean, we were there right before it happened. So they're all very positive about how the thing's going to go. But a couple of years later, it was gone. And so you then imagine, wow, all that time that Phil and these guys poured into this, it just evaporated because of nonsense.
So what is your take as a creative person in thinking about this and interviewing these people? The historian mentioned this and noted that, what would 2000 look like? And if we're to try and describe this, Matt Ridley in his book, How Innovation Works, talks about this, right? The whole idea of complexity, in that we can't even really understand what the future is going to look like, what is going to be involved here. And yet we somehow draw these narratives of we're going to do this, 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 right? It's going to do this. We have, for decades upon decades upon decades, said that there's going to be doom and gloom and overpopulation and so forth and all these other issues, right? And it's not to say that they're not existent, but I keep going back to Julian Simon, the economist, who refers to it as the ultimate resource, right? Human beings' brains and intellect, right, to be able to overcome these problems. And yet that doesn't seem to be the way that most people look at the world. Why do you think that is, that we tend to believe sort of the doomsdayers and we don't want to be the optimists about, we could, in fact, as was noted, right, we have solved lots of these problems, right? And we have overcome.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a complicated question that maybe has a lot of many answers. One being, we're sort of trained as threat machines, so with our DNA and coming up, we're always looking for threats. And so it probably was a handful that were the more risk takers as it wound up, because a risk taker in a hunter-gatherer text is probably rewarded with death more often than not. So I think there's probably something just about our nature. And then I think we, perhaps all of you, certainly myself, experienced the idea of being afraid of risk when, oh, I don't know if we should do this. Sounds kind of crazy. It could go bad. Maybe we should just take the safe route. So it seems prudent, to do the prudent thing. But sometimes doing the prudent thing is not prudent. And so, but there's something in us that sort of feels as, we can't imagine non-linearity. When I talked to Julie for the first time, who's a futurist, I'd never met one of those. She said, so you're talking about change. Are you talking about linear or non-linear? Or no, she didn't give me the change. The first thing she said was, are you talking about linear or non-linear? And I was like, time? But she was at great pains to explain this canyon metaphor you know, where you're canyon crossing. So you're Columbus and you're just selling out. You have no idea what's out there really. Maybe you have some idea, but like you really actually don't have any idea. And so that's really when you're discovering. But that takes a lot of courage, and we don't necessarily want a canyon cross. You have to go out there and discover. And so it's really hard to imagine. So when you start imagining the future, and this is something we had to guard against, right? Because I don't know that we're going to be eating this cell-cultured meat in the future. Maybe something better comes up. I don't know that we're going to be using this carbon capture. Maybe everyone will suddenly go to nuclear power and you know, fusion will be invented and it'll all be different than what we showed, and our thing will be like the Time magazine. So we were at pains to sort of say these are innovators who are trying to solve these problems, not this is the solution to the problem that we have.
We alluded to this last night. One of our students asked was this, is that sort of what's the goal here, right? I mean, most people are probably unaware that things like carbon capture exist, right? That people are trying to produce cultured meat, or at least on any kind of a scale. You know, is part of your goal in all of this just to create more awareness so that people understand that, hey, there are at least individuals out there attempting to try to solve these problems, as opposed to thinking, well, okay, well, we've been told the answer, it's, you know, it's green energy, or we've been told the answer, it's to do the, you know, to try to cut back on farming in this way, to become vegan, and this will help, right? As opposed, you know, and so we've been sort of given these traditional guidelines or directives, either via government or popular culture, and yet people may not even be aware that there's something else. I mean, is that an attempt at your goal here, you think?
Yeah, the linear versus non-linear really comes out, I think, from that questioning method. You know, when we open with a question and it leads us to an answer, but also a deeper question. You don't, if you could ask the question at the end of the journey at the beginning, then you wouldn't have needed to get there. So you've actually gained self-knowledge and awareness by being able to ask the deeper question. And so, yeah, I think in some ways we would love people to watch the film, have an pull some of the optimism and energy of these creators into themselves and see the world a different way. But also to think about this idea of, well, how does change really happen? How does social change really happen? I think you know, Patrick Allett, the historian, talked about how you know, the problem with sewage. And then the problem with horses. Oh, well, we have all this horse manure. It's just, you know, they do the calculations, the economists, and they're like, in 10 years, the entire city of New York City will be filled with horse manure. There's no other way, you know, it's going to be a disaster. We're just going to have smaller cities. There's no way. When you do the people, the amount of horses and the amount of horse manure, we won't have anywhere to put it. You know, it's going to be 5 foot high, you know. And then the solution was the automobile. So if you're sitting here thinking about horses and you're thinking about horse manure and what to do with it, you are not thinking about the automobile and the combustion engine. That solved the problem of the horse manure, but it had a new problem, which was the excess carbon. So, well, we solved the horse manure problem. Bang up job on that. So why do you think we can't solve this problem? Our solutions will often create new, deeper challenges in the same way that asking the first question and following the journey leads you to the deeper question. Why do you not have faith that the same people who solved the first problem suddenly will just not know what they're doing and throw up their hands over the next set of challenges?
So wanting to open it up to anybody that's here, or if we have any questions online. So.
My question was, what was the process of finding and then choosing and then vetting the companies that you're highlighting here?
Well, we just showed up, knocked on the door, and anybody let us in. That's who we went with. So for us, it was very important that we deal with these large global problems. So we had to have a large global problem, and then we wanted to know if there's a solution to it. So global warming, is there a solution? So I was sitting there with a fellow director, or with our director, Michael Ozias, fellow producer, Andrea Fuller, and I was just thinking, I was like, surely some engineer or nerd has come up with a doohickey that would do something about this. And then we Googled, and then we found Klaus Lochner. So it was so funny. It kind of just dawned on us, right? Because we're like, oh, what do you do about global warming? Well, there's this, well, there's that, the oil, I don't know. And I never really thought to just see, is there some person with a doohickey that would solve this problem? And so then when we ask, and we then asked Google, it answered, and there was. And so it was actually a lot of that, where, you know, like, so in terms of the hunger and the animal welfare, well, it didn't take us long to find Josh Tetrick. We weren't looking for him initially, of course, but we found him. And then in terms of the vetting, we have one of the assistants on our team, Katie, does what's called what they call the dark web search to make sure these people haven't killed anyone or done anything like that, said any terrible things. Anyway, so we go through a process of pre-interviews. We talk to them on the phone. We'll then go to a site visit where we scout the whole place and decide where we want to shoot and get their whole story. And then, you know, we show up, but it's a very planned thing when we're there, albeit what wasn't planned is when we had to move our crew and gear from one boat to another, and then the swells started rising, and the boats were banging together and like this, and it was like, okay, now you jump. Okay, now you jump. And I was like, give me the camera. I will go with the camera because it costs like $50,000.
You had mentioned at some point in our conversation, just to follow up on that, you had actually looked at some of the regulatory agencies to sort of think about what problems and things like that. Maybe talk just a little bit about, or some of the commissions, I thought.
Oh, yes. So when we're looking at these problems, you have, I mean, the agencies, getting into this a little bit more and doing the research, you know, I learned that, you know, it's actually not the job of the EPA to solve global warming. It's largely their job to follow the acts that were and powers given to them by Congress, which is mostly focused on clean air and clean water. They don't really have the power to create a carbon permit system. They can't just do whatever they want, though in talking to them, that is certainly what they would like to do. So it's not a case that the EPA officials are sitting up there and I think that they know that they think this is going to work. And they've seen it work in other areas like acid rain, these market tools, but they're not empowered to do anything about it. And so that was kind of an illusion popping thing, right? Like, oh, well, you think the regulatory agency is working on this problem, but actually they're really not. And it's really the innovators that are working on the problem. And then when we thought about it, well, these guys are really on the same team. But in media, and even to a certain degree amongst themselves, they think that they're adversaries. You know, the FDA versus the drug companies. Well, if the drug companies didn't make any product, then the FDA wouldn't exist because there'd be nothing for them to evaluate. And then they go back and forth. So there's, yeah, so I think like that was part of our finding was just how does regulation work, and we wanted to just sort of I suppose pull a veil up in some ways to be like, these guys are not gods and they're not focused on solving these problems. The entrepreneurs are.
Want to get a little meta here. We've talked a little bit about how some of these entrepreneurs and CEOs were pulled away from the work they'd like to be doing in order to deal with regulations. You as a producer, you sort of sit at the intersection of entrepreneur and creative. How much has regulation had to pull you away from what you would like to do?
Oh, right. Well, and this film was supposed to launch right before COVID, so kind of killed the whole thing in some ways. That was a big regulatory situation. The things that we face are, if, for example, we probably shouldn't have done the water thing. Like when you're on water, there's an act that specifically is related to being on water. If we had had an actor out there, a whole new set of regulations would have come in that would have made our insurance skyrocket to such a point as we could have never gone out and done it at all. You know, so the fact that it was documentary was the only way we were able to do it. You know, in Los Angeles, when you're doing anything that isn't just in a private building, not so no one can see you, it's $800 for a permit, no matter what. You have to show up, give it to them in cash or cashier's check. Usually 2 weeks ahead of time because of the bureaucracy is so they will not give you the permit. So we deal with a lot of that. And we deal with a lot of it when it comes to do we have permission to show this content? So fortunately for us, we were doing something on regulation. We could show a lot of the crazy zany videos like that regulatory science thing that we felt, which was shown yesterday, which we felt was just one of the creepiest things we'd ever seen. But it was produced by the government, so we were able to use it. In a lot of other instances, there's complexities in terms of you know, what we can use and all that whole process.
I know we've asked you a few questions about kind of what you wanted the audience to take away to be, or what you wanted them to feel after watching the film, and I was just curious what you felt your biggest takeaway from your involvement in the film was.
Well, biggest takeaway was no more stop motion for me. And then I took away that it was just an incredible honor to be able to work with all the amazing people on our team. And at one moment I was sitting and I was watching the edit with our director and our editor, and I was just watching this whole thing because, you know, we're running around and I don't see the footage. I mean, I'm at every moment that you saw, I was there, you know, doing something, probably being pissed off at somebody for not doing what they're supposed to. And so I'm watching it, and suddenly it's like, wow, I couldn't have made all this if I tried. You know, I just couldn't. You just see the product of collaboration. And yeah, so that was a way I could connect to the entrepreneurs that we saw in the film, because they very much seem to give us that experience themselves. I have a vision, I believe in it, I don't know if it's going to work, but I'm bringing people together and we're all working together with this positive energy to create something that's greater than ourselves. And so I felt that way about this movie, and so that was a big takeaway for me. Just something I always want to have moving forward on projects.
I was going to ask, this is tall. I was going to ask about the stop motion. Like, what was y'all's reason for including that? I've never seen that in a documentary before, and I thought it was something really cool that y'all did.
Oh yeah, well, we thought it was really cool too. That's why we did it. So we had, so when you have something, when you're dealing with ideas and not characters, in a sense, we had to have a means of realizing the ideas. You know, so the alien spaceship is regulation, you know, and it's going around and it's checking stuff out. And, you know, we wanted it to be fairly characterized. It's not issuing and billowing smoke and old and, you know, retarded looking. It looks clean and cool and sciencey. And when you're on the inside of it, you see there's all these people and they care and they have tools and they're trying to figure things out. But they just can't, you know, they just can't. And so then we wanted a world where this was taking place and us to see the innovators. So then we create little mini places and scenarios where, you know, you kind of get, this isn't really about Josh Tetrick, this is about anyone who would try to do this. Yeah, so that was why we did it. And it's just to give you a sense, though, I think like the first day of shooting, we got 4 seconds. So it's a day, 4 seconds. So I think there's about 5 minutes of it in the movie. Very hard. When I watch South Park's America, what is it? America Police. What is that movie? The South Park. When I watched Team America again after we had done this, nothing but absolute amazement to those guys. Like, I can't believe they were able to do that. I was just incredible.
Well, first, I want to thank you for producing this excellent documentary, and I want to thank you for coming to the College of Charleston to talk about this. Speaking of college campuses, when I think about innovation, I think about the role of universities in helping to foster innovation. And so I guess I have a 2-part question. One is, what do you think about the role of higher education in helping to spur innovation? And then second, what advice would you give to some of the future innovators in this room?
Well, we featured 2 university research, one at Arizona State, Klaus Lochner, and also at Wake with Dr. Atala. So definitely we felt this universities are places where you could have this deep research and these innovations can happen. And then in both of the universities, their goal was ultimately to spin these out into businesses, because you can't just have a business be a charitable institution for it to live on. It needs to be able to generate revenue so it can continue innovation and grow moving forward. And that was the attitude, and it was wonderful to work with the folks at Wake and also at Arizona State. We're very glad to have the access there. I think there are other parts of the university that are not necessarily of the same view as some of these places, right? So and the university is a place for open inquiry, but you know, we sort of find that, well, some departments or places are kind of diametrically opposed to, say, what we're trying to do, and would, you know, not be interested in talking to us. Suddenly everything we're trying to do is very political, and oh, who's involved in this? What are you trying to say? Which is unfortunate, I think, in the university today, because it really sort of becomes not about open inquiry and more about advancing a particular ideological view to accolades, instead of like having people develop the necessary tools to have open inquiry and pursue a life of wonder and joy at discovery. The second question was,
What advice would you give to some of the
oh yeah.
innovators in the room?
Yeah. Well, I think kind of hitting on the first question, to me, when I was in college, you know, I went to Emory in Atlanta, so very much like College of Charleston, and I met a lot of people who wound up being attorneys or going on to, you know, I think a future that they thought was safe. Nothing against being an attorney, though I don't like paying them money, and they tend to just tell me no, so I don't like that. I think that there's a lot of virtue in stepping out into that unknown, and you don't actually have to know what you want to do. I have been 200 foot up in the air at an oil refinery and negative, you know, whatever degrees. I thought my fingers were going to fall off. I was out on this boat. I've been able to travel, you know, all around the world doing trainings. I've been in, you know, I was in a diesel factory. You know, my colleague just like got done driving one of these gigantic combines. And wherever you go, you suddenly find something of incredible interest. Like that combine, you don't need to drive it. This corn combine is basically programmed through GPS, and the farmer just sits there and listens to podcasts all day. It already is pre-programmed to do everything that it's going to do. Somebody had to create this device. You know, we watched it from when, you know, they made the diesel, they pulled it out of the ground. You know, they now are making this renewable diesel. They go, they fill a tractor. I mean, I had no idea that people did any of this stuff. You know, growing up in Alabama, going to university, I just had no idea all these jobs. I mean, growing seaweed, you know, I just wouldn't have thought about it. But as it turns out, they need people. Do you want to go and be on the boat and check out, help us with the algae? I mean, it's an incredible thing. But you never know about it unless you sort of say, well, I'm just not going to go be a lawyer. I'm going to go take a job and maybe not make that much money, but enough to survive and figure out and learn. And then I'm going to see what opportunities are out there for me, and my passion will emerge, and I'm going to trust that process, that when I find it, I will know, and then I'm going to be all in on it. And what I will have learned will put me in the position to have what I need at that moment to say yes.
My question is, I thought this film was fantastic, but did you receive any negative reaction or pushback to the film?
We don't really receive a lot of negative feedback for people who watch the film. You know, I think some feedback we got from audiences is they're like, oh, I don't like the regulation stuff, it's boring. And my response is, I know. It is, isn't it? So I think people generally really like the stories, and they're kind of like, whoa, this is amazing. But You know, we really wanted to focus on the regulation aspect because that's actually the main holdup from having the amazing happen. So probably if we were just making a film to make money, we would have cut all the regulation stuff and done it just about the amazing. And probably we would have included some drama like so-and-so loves so-and-so, but then they broke up and now what's going to happen with the business? You know, but for us, it was important to focus on this thing, like it or not.
Did you find it challenging to like balance the science of the innovation with like the economics of the regulation and the story as well? Like, did anyone say something they were like, hold up, like you need to say that in much simpler terms, or like that affect the story at all?
It bothered all of us to no end that yesterday the former FDA counsel used the word bespoke when he was talking about goods. He's like, well, you have large, you know, commercial goods that go to everyone, but this good is bespoke. And I was like, what is bespoke? They don't know. Why did you say that? So there were definitely times like that where we they would get technical, but often we found ourselves in the opposite position where people when they go on camera will often tend to dumb it down immediately. But our reaction was, we're in this crazy lab with all this rad stuff. Go into detail. We're looking at it. You know, it's fine if people don't know exactly what you're talking about. You know, we want people to learn. So we actually, so for us, it was really kind of driving them to actually show us everything and not just sit down and talk about what they're doing in platitudes.
Yeah, I actually spent my academic career both as an innovator and then with 10 years on a medical IRB as a regulator. So I've worn a lot of hats, and the issue for regulators basically is following rules, but not having anything really bad happen under your watch. You don't really get points for letting somebody get through and run a set of experiments on a group of patients and have something really bad happen. So there's a natural tendency in the process to be restrictive when in doubt, because that's where the risk for the regulator is. Could you comment, because I thought the whole issue around appropriate and constructive regulation is the key here, how you would set up regulatory processes or that would foster rather than sometimes inhibit innovation, which it can do?
Yes, that's a great question. So yesterday I mentioned this idea of these zones, where you just sort of have a zone in Wyoming where they can just do these experiments. If you want to live there, cool. If you don't, then don't live there. But there's a lot of people who want to participate in these things. And so if you have an area of experimentation, much in the way federalism is supposed to be an experiment of the state, so it doesn't really seem to work out that way when the federal government basically imposes one rule across everything. Yeah, we have these little areas of experimentation, because as the regulator, I 100% heard from them this fear. Well, if they had allowed formaldehyde in the United, I'm sure I said that wrong, they allowed in the United States, look at what would have happened. You know, and they got a lot of credit for stopping something bad. But we would have never, but they do not get credit for promoting something good, usually. You know, so if Elon goes to Mars, no one's going to thank the FAA or anyone who figured out a way that they could launch these spaceships. You know, when new drugs come out, they don't know, they don't really say, and thanks to the FDA. Those guys don't really get the credit they deserve, and they don't seem to be really rewarded when good things happen. But they certainly are hammered if anything bad happens. So I think I don't know exactly what it needs to be, but I feel like there needs to be some means of changing the incentives in the regulatory space, and there also needs to be these zones because as a regulator, it seems impossible to gather all of this information when these innovations are happening so fast and everywhere. And it's also very difficult to just wrap your mind around the whole. We heard from them, because you're specialized. And like in academia, when you see a lot of specialization, that's really great because we're getting lots of information, but at some point, we need integrators to connect things together. And it seems like our regulatory agencies, from what we learned, they do not have that happening right now. Any follow up on that?
I mean, go ahead if you. The issues, of course, are, as you've mentioned, the incentive structures right around this, and you're right. Lots of downside, right, but not a lot of upside on all of this. And to your point, I don't think it's a question of necessarily these people wanting to be malicious or anything else. I think it's just a question of incentive structure and sclerosis that builds up over time, right? Of this is the way we've done this, and I don't know how to do this new thing, right? So we don't know what to do. But I want to wrap up, and so maybe just any final thoughts that you have about that you'd want to share with us, either.
Yes, I thought of another thing that I thought of in this documentary, which is the sunset clause. I thought it might make sense of these regulatory bodies that whenever they set them up, there's a sunset clause, and they have to destroy the thing at a certain point and then recreate another one. I guess the reason I was kind of floating this idea, which we didn't include, was because, okay, well, let's call the sunset clause 50 years. Well, if the science and everything has all changed across 50 years, or at a different point, well, then all of this buildup, maybe needs to just get restructured and with new thinking and setting up a new agency that's handling the same stuff, but maybe in a different way. I just remembered that, but we weren't able to. I think that was my idea, not something we heard. So it was probably bad. I guess to wrap up, thank you so much for having me. I'm here in front of you, but there were a lot of people behind making this film. Michael Ozias, the director, Andrea Fuller, Ben Gaskell, DP, Victoria Hill, co-producer, Dan Hanna, the editor. It only looks the way it does because of all of them, and it was a real collaboration. And so we all I feel indebted to them. And then, of course, we as filmmakers, the greatest payoff of making a film is when people watch it. So thank you.
I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. And for those of you who are on Zoom, again, we've got the, we'll throw up really quickly here the URL for the survey. Again, we are always appreciative of your feedback. Again, if you want to learn more about the center, we have marketing materials and so forth here that you can learn more about what we're doing. You can, of course, follow us and on our social media and as well as on our web pages to get updates, right? So we'll send you information about when in our next events and things are. So I want to thank everybody on that helped me to put this event together tonight and make sure that we got this. I want to thank our IT team. These guys have been great for us the last couple of nights and all semester to do this virtually, which is not something we normally have done at this level. And so I appreciate the fact that they've been taking this to a whole nother level for us. And I want to thank again all of you for coming out. So enjoy, have a good evening, and thank you again.